Okay, I think we're live. And today I just wanted to do a very short video on Surah 63, which is entitled Munafiqun, also known as the hypocrites. Munafiq is a hypocrite, but that's the English translation. The word in the Quran is munafiq or munafiqin, plural. So this chapter is probably one of the most ironic chapters because it's Muhammad warning other Muslims to beware hypocrites and liars. And that's basically the thrust of the surah. It's just Muhammad admonishing Muslims, his followers, to beware hypocrites and liars. And of course, Muhammad was the foremost liar and hypocrite among them. But as I explained in earlier videos, these are Muslims who Muhammad felt in some way betrayed him. So he's not talking about Jews or Christians or pagan Arabs within his own tribe, the Quraysh, or other Arabian tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. He's basically talking about Muslims that had betrayed him or betrayed his cause in some way. But the hilarious thing is it's Muhammad telling people not to put their trust in hypocrites and liars. So in verse 1, it says, when the hypocrites come to you, they say, we bear witness that you are most surely Allah's apostle, and Allah knows that you are most surely his apostle. Does he? That's a good question to ask for Muslims. Did Allah know he was his apostle? Then why did he have him die the death of a false prophet? That's a good question you can pose to your Muslim friends. And Allah bears witness that the hypocrites are surely liars. How does he bear witness? God bore witness that Jesus was his anointed and his son at his baptism. How did Allah bear witness that Muhammad was his apostle? He doesn't really explain that. They make their oaths a shelter and thus turn away from Allah's way. Surely evil is that which they do. That is because they believe, then disbelieve. So a seal is set upon their hearts so that they do not understand. So, as I said, these are basically Muslims who retreated or did something to raise the ire of Muhammad or challenge him in some way. But it's hilarious that the second verse is condemning people who take false oaths or who swear falsely. Hi, Nate, and Corinth, and Mr. Samard. Thanks for coming. But the hilarious part is he's condemning people for making vain oaths or false oaths, and that's the Quran consists of Muhammad making repeated false oaths and vain oaths and going back and breaking them, and usually trying to cobble together some sort of ad hoc revelation that justifies the fact that he's betraying an earlier oath or an earlier promise. And he takes oaths, the most ridiculous oaths, like I mentioned in when we were doing the surah on the moon, or the surah on the star, which is Sirius, the dog star, the brightest star in the night sky. He takes oaths to these things that you're not supposed to worship. I mean, he's basically doing the same thing that you would find someone who was a palmist or an astrologer doing. So he's taking oaths to the sky, to the moon, to the Quran itself, which is eternal according to Muslims, even though that's somehow even though that can't really be reconciled with the idea of Tawheed, yet they still believe it's eternal. So he's taking oaths to the Quran, taking oaths and swearing constantly, and constantly going back on his word. And yet here he warns people not to make their oaths a shelter, which is Muhammad's modus operandi. That's that's what he does. That's what he does for most of his adult life after he starts proselytizing. So in 4 it says, and when you see them, their persons will please you, and if they speak, you will listen to their speech. They are as if they were big pieces of wood clad with garments. This is another part of the Quran. Muslims will say this is a clunky translation, or this is a mistranslation into the English, and you need to read it in the Arabic. But uh, yeah, I was going to say trust me, but no. But it's simply it's not true. It's would sound just as ridiculous in the Arabic trying to understand what he means by people who are who seem like big pieces of wood clad with garments. They think every cry to be against them. So that verse makes no sense. They are the enemy, therefore beware of them. May Allah destroy them. Whence are they turned back? And the irony here is that at the beginning of this verse, he says, "Their persons will please you when you see them." And again, this is a conceit of Muhammad trying to deceive people with words and dissimulation and misleading everyone and trying to get them to believe a bunch of utter nonsense. Just don't take oaths upon poor. Oh man, that deserves a rim shot. I don't have a drum set though, but or it's coy. So in 5, it says, and when it is said to them, come, the apostle of Allah will ask forgiveness for you. They turn back their heads, and you may see them turning away while they are big with pride. This entire surah is just an indictment of everything that Muhammad did and everything Muhammad based his leadership technique upon. All of the tactics and stratagems that he tried to use in order to manipulate people into following Islam, he's condemning them in this surah. And in 6 it says, it is alike to them whether they beg forgiveness for them or do not beg forgiveness for them. Allah will never forgive them. Surely Allah does not guide the transgressing people. So a point to remember is that Allah shows no mercy and extends no mercy to someone, even if they disobey him, but they are repentant, he's still going to punish them. And 7, it says, they it is who say, do not spend upon those who are with the apostle of Allah until they break up. And Allah's are the treasures of the heavens and the earth, but the hypocrites do not understand. They say, if we return to Medina, the mighty will surely drive out the meaner therefrom. And to Allah belongs the might, and to his apostle, and to the believers, but the hypocrites do not know. So again, it's focused like a laser beam on people who weren't unstinting military allies of Muhammad and his crew, who didn't support him in what would appear to be uh, very lopsided battles that eventually he did wind up winning many of these battles and using that as an excuse to justify his rule, the fact that he was a divinely ordained prophet, the fact that he won a lot of military battles, but even those battles, the victories, although were you could say they were very well crafted strategically in certain ways, certain battles, but they weren't miraculous in any sense. They weren't any more miraculous than Napoleon and the French overcoming the Prussian and Austrian armies at Austerlitz, or or the battles that uh, during the Taiping Rebellion, where the Qin armies were pushed back by a group of scattered militias of fanatics. So I mean, you do have unusual outcomes in certain battles, but the battles that Muhammad won were not miraculous in any sense. And the people who opposed him weren't doing so out of uh, a malice towards God. They were simply rival Arabian tribes and claimants to the Arabian Peninsula, so they did it out of their own self-interest. O you who believe, let not your wealth or your children divert you from the remembrance of Allah, and whoever does that, these are the losers. And this is a repeated invocation in the Quran. Muhammad calling people losers. They're losers. They're not. They're they are among the losers. This is something he repeats incessantly throughout the Quran, just like he repeats how great Allah is. But he doesn't provide any real scriptural evidence to support his claims, to support his truth claims. He doesn't really give any real empirical evidence that this is true. It's simply ad hominem attacks. So in 10 it says, and spend out of what we have given you before death comes to one of you, so that he should say, my Lord, why didst thou not respite me to a near term, so that I should have given alms and been of the doers of good deeds. And this ties into the whole idolatry of bloodshed and killing people and sacrificing your own life in the name of Allah. It's a very sanguinary, very militant faith. Allah is similar to other pagan gods in the sense that he requires blood sacrifice among you. It's not the sacrifice of Jesus. It's not his it's not his sacrifice that atones for sins. It's the blood of everyone else. So everyone else has to go and sacrifice their wealth and their blood and attack and kill and attack other non-Muslims and subjugate them, because that's what Allah wills. And it's just an unending, unceasing cycle. And then finally, in 11, it says that Allah does not respite a soul when its appointed term has come, and Allah is aware of what you do. And this goes to Allah's, how cognizant Allah is of what's going on. And as I explained in other videos, he really isn't an omniscient God. And that's one of the failures. Muslims can't justify claiming that Allah is the one God when he doesn't have the character traits that you would associate with God. So God is everlasting, he's eternal, he has aseity. In other words, there's no beginning and no end. He is uncreated, and he is omniscient and omnipotent. There's no restriction on his power. No one can circumscribe the will of God. And you see this repeatedly in the Bible. In fact, in Psalm 2, God laughs at all the designs. Why do the heathen rage? He laughs at all the designs to somehow circumvent or resist his will. And that you can't say the same thing about Allah. Allah is not. He might be aware of some things, but he is not aware of everything. And that's that's kind of the clincher argument against belief in Allah. If you have a God that's not omniscient, then he's not God. He's not the God. But I just wanted to read a couple of verses before I end to compare the hypocrites to just illustrate the idiocy of the Quran, which has a chapter entitled "The Hypocrites," written by someone whose entire public life was marked by hypocrisy. So in Titus 1:16, it says, "They profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate." So this is another one of Paul's epistles warning a pastor in the early church, warning him about these people who are false teachers. And Muhammad is someone that exemplifies these characteristics. And you find this throughout the Gospel of Matthew as well. Jesus warning his disciples and warning them about not heeding these people. So in Matthew 6:1, I believe, uh, okay, so in Matthew 7:5 it says, "Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye." So he's warning against hypocrisy by people who judge others for sins that they indulge in, but even judge others when they are committing sins uh, that are even worse, that are even more egregious. So, and he warns about hypocrisy repeatedly. So, in 15, he warns specifically, "Beware false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth forth not good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits you shall know them." So this is an indictment of false prophets, and it's an indictment when you think about it of Islam, because all of the fruit of Islam are rotten. It doesn't matter whether you're discussing Sunni or Shia or Sufi or Ahmadiyya or Yazidi, Salafi, Wahhabi, um, and even the cults that arose that are offshoots of Islam. All of the people claiming to be Mahdi, Ismaili Naziri sect, who who look to the Aga Khan, the Nation of Islam, even the cults that have a very attenuated relationship with Orthodox Islam, but are basically fruit. These are all fruit of the fruit of Islam that you can trace back to Muhammad. People, whether they're Orthodox Sunni Muslims, the most Orthodox Sunni Muslims, or or the Baha'i, that's another one. Um, these are all generated, or all were generated out of Islam, and or you can trace back to the tree that was planted by Muhammad, and all of the fruit are rotten in terms of all of these sects and and um, the Druze, all of it, and you see it especially among uh, Sunni jihadist groups like ISIS and Boko Haram and Lashkar-e Taiba. You see it especially then for example, the Al Shabaab blowing up and killing 70 or 80 people. These are the most concrete examples where you can see the religion that spawned this is obviously false, but even less clearly diabolical actions, let's say, even things that are more subtle, you see the evidence of corruption, like the grooming gangs in the UK that between 98 and 100% of them are Muslim grooming gangs, are run by Pakistani Muslims, or the societies you see in places like Pakistan or the government of Iran. These are all evidence of corruption and bad fruit. And if every single fruit that comes off of a tree is bad, then the tree is rotten. You have to cut down you have to cut down the tree, and uh, as it says here, every tree that bringeth forth not good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. So you have to abandon Islam. You can't try to reform it or change it or put a shiny gloss or veneer, a patina of respectability on it. It's impossible, because every single fruit, you can't find a good fruit that's come from Islam, regardless of what sect or what clan or Islamic uh, offshoot you can find. Like, there's no good fruit. And I think I mentioned Matthew 6. So in Matthew 6:1 it says, "Take heed that ye do not that ye do not your alms before men to be seen of them, otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily, I say unto you, they have their reward." And it continues, "And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily, I say unto you, they have their reward." So you couldn't get a more concrete, explicit condemnation of Islam than in this one verse, because one thing that distinguishes Muslims is the gigantic prayer meetings they hold, where they obstruct traffic, and you see this in Paris, in London, throughout Europe, and even in the United States and in North America, where they have to roll out a carpet or a pillow and just start praying in the middle, in front of everyone, in order to attract accolades or intimidate other people. But in other words, they need to be the center of attention, and that is the perfect reflection of a pagan centric worship, where you have to idolize yourself, and you have to attract attention to yourself, and show other people how religious and pious you are. And this was something Jesus repeatedly condemned the Pharisees for. And it's a perfect illustration of why Islam is a false religion. You don't even need to go into the Quran. You just need to look at the Bible and watch what people are doing, and perceive it from their actions. Just look at them. How do they pray? How do they give alms? How do they do these things? And you can come to your own conclusions. And I just wanted to read one final verse from Romans, which I think puts the nail in the coffin of any any idea that Islam is a valid way to approach God. So in Romans 2:3, it says, and it's also like the nail in the coffin of Muhammad as a true prophet. So in chapter 2, it begins, "Therefore thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art judged, for wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself, for thou that judgest doest the same things. but we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth against them which commit such things. And thinkest thou this, O man, that thou judgest them which do such things, and doest the same, that thou shalt escape the judgment of God? Or despisest thou the riches of his goodness and forbearance and long suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leadeth to repentance? But after thy hardness and impenitent heart treasurest up thyself wrath against the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God, who will render to every man according to his deeds. So this is an indictment of Muhammad, and you can see just by going over the surah, the hypocrites, where you have Muhammad, who's the chief of hypocrites and liars, condemning people for lying and hypocrisy, and also taking oaths, despite the fact that he took numerous vain oaths and repeatedly falsely swore. And yet you have an entire surah here where he's condemning people who do the exact same thing that he does, and in fact do it to a much lesser degree than he does. So that was Surah 63, Munafiqun, the hypocrites. Yeah, I mean they are kind of modern day Pharisees, particularly how they go about the importance they place not on having a relationship with God so much as, what the length of your mustache is, or your beard, or how you dress. You have to dress in a dishdasha or thobe, and dress like an Arab. Even if you're not an Arab, you have to dress like an Arab and speak in Arabic, even if you're not from the Middle East. Complete hypocrisy. Hi, Birds of the Abyss. The other paraclete. Okay, I think I missed the beginning of that, but thanks everyone for joining. GW, Irene, all of the mods, the mod squad, Nate for coming. Have to hand it to Nate. And that was Surah 63. The next Surah is Surah 64, Loss and Gain. And then there are a couple of longer, well, not long, but, surahs that are a few pages. And then by page 400, you just have one page long, or a surahs with 15 or 14 sentences. So should fly by in the new year. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming. Happy New Year. If I don't see you before then, happy 2020. All right. I didn't make Nate a mod yet, but I probably will. I probably have a larger mod to viewer ratio than any other channel on YouTube. I think or sub. I think 2% of my subscribers are moderators. So it's very well policed. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming, and I'll see you in the new year.